Thank you for joining. My name is Dan Orkin. I'm a co-founder at Envision Blockchain. Today's topic is immutability and Microsoft Dynamics 365. And we wanted to approach blockchain from a business perspective, not so much from a technology perspective in the way that we communicate what the purpose of blockchain is. And some of the ways that we do this is by talking about the value chain. And this is a concept that was brought on by Michael Porter back in 1985. And what he was talking about in this particular value chain is a way to analyze your organization. And, the idea of a value chain is really based on, a process view of the entire organization, really from the top down, and it's made up of a lot of different components. And, there's inputs, there's outputs, there's a whole production that happens between money, the labor, the materials, equipment, and building and land and administration and management, and it can go on and on, right? So when we kind of unfold the different pieces, we have supporting activities and primary activities. And what's interesting about that is if you were to take a deeper look into these supporting activities, you could see that one of them is the firm infrastructure. This is where you're typically going to see your line management, administration, your financial management, etc. Then there's also HR, right? This is where you recruit your staff, you're training, you're paying your team, your organization, you're retaining them, the ongoing training, etc. There's also technology development. Obviously, with what we're talking about, immutability, Microsoft Dynamics 365, technology development is something that we're going to be focused on for the rest of the presentation. So keep that in the back of your mind. But this is where you have, the IT behind really all the operations that needs to happen. So you have your technology innovations, improvements, and development. You also have your procurement. You have suppliers, you have agreements, you have vendors, you have services, pricing, right? Whether you are a services organization or manufacturing, or if you're just something of that route, you probably are procuring something. Right. And then all these supporting activities essentially work to support the primary activities, which is your inbound logistics, which is your production, your outbound logistics, your marketing and sales, and your services. So this is a view of one particular organization. And I see that we have, thank you, that we have, pretty healthy attendance over here. So not everybody is going to see themselves in the same spot. So you might be from a services part of your company. You might be from marketing and sales. You might be from the production part or the inbound logistics, or you might be the IT. You might be from HR. And the whole purpose of this screen is now just kind of think about where you are, where you sit within your particular organization. And this brought on something interesting, right? As we start to go through this industrial revolution, and there's been some talks about us being in our fourth, and we're not here to discuss that, but essentially from the first industrial revolution to where we are now, we have globalization, right? We have trains, we have planes, we have cars, communication, internet, right? All these things that allowed us to work outside of just one particular area, right? So we're looking at this now as globalization equals decentralized operations, right? And I don't want to mix decentralized applications, blockchain talk, right? And we'll get to that in a second, with decentralized operations, because in reality, decentralized operations is nothing new, and that's a cause of globalization. So again, remember the value chain that we just discussed, and now let's kind of extrapolate on that view a little bit, right? So now, because of globalization, you're able to work with another company. For example, if you're a service part of one company, right? If you're a service department of one, you might be working with the inbound logistics of another, right? You have notes, you have messages, you have emails, you have, fax, if anyone is still faxing. You have different ways to communicate. And that's what business is all about. It's all about communication, right? So we have this concept of decentralized operations, which has been around for quite some time now. But essentially, decentralization, or decentralized operations rather, faced its challenges. So for the next two slides, what we're going to do is we're going to show you two different case studies. And this is really setting the stage for the rest of, the rest of this presentation. Where the case study number one, it dealt with a company called Tech Data. And Tech Data, what happened was they had this log management server. And for those that may not know what a log management server is, essentially it was an internal service that the organization, Tech Data, what they were using it for. It contained error information, right? So when something happened, there was an error. These errors needed to get logged so that, the Tech Data staff, for example, can troubleshoot issues. That, it really comes up when customers try to do something online, for example, right? So they get an error message. You need a log information on that. The problem was that this was a centralized server, and the company didn't put a password on that server. It was a very simple mistake. But because of that very simple mistake, what happened was now this aggregated server of log information was now accessible to anyone that had an internet connection and was able to pinpoint where this endpoint was. So 264 gigabytes of client, employee, and personal data was leaked out, which include private API keys, bank information, payment details, usernames, unencrypted passwords, full names, job titles, email addresses, postal addresses, telephone numbers, fax numbers, etc. Right? We kind of get the point over here. So what we're trying to say over here is that there was a decentralized operation, but everything was centralized. And because it was centralized, if there's one point of failure, important and sensitive information could easily be taken, right? So keep that in the back of your mind. The next case study that we're going to talk about is with the acquisition of Revlon and Elizabeth Arden. I think this is really interesting because, part of the title over here, we're talking about Microsoft Dynamics 365, and here we can kind of make a little bit of a parallel and you'll know what I'm talking about. So back in 2016, Revlon went through a major acquisition of Elizabeth Arden, massive acquisition. What happened was, and let's get to kind of the ERP side of it. So Revlon was using Oracle systems. Elizabeth Arden was using Microsoft Dynamics systems. During the acquisition, it was assumed that when they were going to, merge their operations or acquire, right, it was kind of all going to roll up into one, that they were going to roll out with a new ERP system. Doesn't matter what that ERP system is. Right? We're not going to discuss what that is because it essentially, the fault was not necessarily with the new ERP system. The fault was the crossover, right? So if anyone has gone through any sort of ERP implementation, there's always risks to be, there's always risk to be considered. So when that crossover happened, millions and millions of dollars in lost sales happened. Basically, what happened was that there was this, in North Carolina, there was a major operation, and the RFP, which we're going to get into, the RFPs got missing, right? So companies were sending RFPs for cosmetic products that these two organizations were in. And because of the crossover, this ERP, this new one, didn't capture this. So they lost out. I believe it was somewhere around $64 million of net sales. Huge. It was a big lost opportunity. When they were finally able to catch up with that, they needed to pay, a lot of dollars in expedited shipping fees. There was other anticipated expenses that happened. And on top of that, the stockholders had to go ahead and take the legal action. And we can all imagine that the stock price all crashed. and the legal action happened out there in 2019. So it was pretty relevant. Keep this case study in the back of your mind as we're going to talk about ERP systems, right? Because what really needed to happen is decentralized operations needs to meet decentralized applications. It's a really interesting concept, and we're pulling this slide from something that we presented earlier because we don't want individuals that are, CISO focused, Chief Security Officer focused, to think that just because you're dealing with the decentralized application that it's not safe. And here's what we mean by that is because typically you can't just use a blockchain. The blockchain by itself does nothing, right? It needs to be part of an entire end-to-end solution. So we have what we call existing technology and new technology. And this, if you see in the lower left-hand corner, we have supporting activities and technology development. This is part of Michael Porter's value chain analysis, where there needs to be this sort of technology development to keep up with the value chain. So existing technology is nothing new. We have our cloud platform, we have databases, containers, integration services. But kind of sandwiched in between that, we have our blockchain network and smart contracts, and this is new. Then we have, on top of that, we have our line of business applications, the user interfaces, the web apps, etc. Right? And this is the entire end-to-end solution. So enter, right now, we like to say, don't be afraid of Mainnet. Businesses need a way to leverage blockchain technology that is compliant with security best practices. And we're going to talk about how this would, really help out these two case studies earlier. But for those that are not familiar yet, we have this baseline protocol that was just launched by Microsoft EY and Consensus. It started somewhere around 10, 11 months ago. And there's some talk in the community about what baseline protocol is, but we like to say it's not a product or a solution, but rather it's a transformation pattern where you're using this blockchain. It should be a mainnet in a way that you can use it as a reference point. So if you see in the lower right-hand corner, we have company A and company B, and they're leveraging this always-on mainnet state machine that acts as a reference point, right? So the next question is, okay, so this is baseline. So what really is baselining? And baselining is what you would consider when you have two or more systems that store data that need to run in a state of consistency. So what would that look like from a picture perspective? And think about this one case study number 2. You could have one system on Microsoft Dynamics 365, another one on SAP, another one on Salesforce, another one on Oracle, and they have this baseline stack implemented, and they're all using the mainnet, which is the public Ethereum blockchain, for example, as your frame of reference, so that everything is running in a state of consistency and no information ever leaves your system of record, whether it's D365 or SAP or whatnot, right? So what happened was that in the baseline protocol, there was this first reference implementation called Radish 34 that followed a procurement use case, which is really similar to that of case study number 2. So there was one company that was sending out an RFP to one buyer, for example, that was sending out an RFP to multiple suppliers. The suppliers then had to answer back in a proposal, and then if that was agreed upon, then the buyer would then send back the purchase order. And when this was first introduced to the community, it was done using a custom portal, if you will, right, like a web app. So what we did, Envision Blockchain specifically in collaboration with a couple of other organizations, Unibright and Provide, we put together a proof of concept showing this procurement demo, not using the custom portal, but actually using systems of record to showcase how something like this could be done. So what we showed basically is how one organization on SAP could communicate with another system using Microsoft Dynamics 365 without ever having to implement something completely new, right? This is just like a plugin, if you will, right? And it's like an extension cable that you would plug into your system of record, not having to kind of create a whole new ERP for this fashion. So why did we choose Microsoft Dynamics 365 from the Envision standpoint? It's because if you take a look at the lower left-hand corner, that's that Michael Porter value chain. And then if you take a look at what Microsoft Dynamics 365 provides from a Microsoft perspective is they offer so many different business modules that really speak to all of these different daily duties, if you will, from the value chain perspective, where you have sales and marketing, customer service and field service and project operations and finance, supply chain management, human resources, and retail. For the purposes of that specific demo, we wanted to take a look into the finance and the supply chain management side. And again, looking at this kind of sandwich of technologies, nothing new here, right? This is all old stuff. This is existing technology. This is best practices. Dynamics 365 is implemented by organizations small and large and Fortune 500 down to the SMB market. The reason why we wanted to take a look into the finance and operations side is because they really do a good job at addressing the daily needs from the finance and the supply chain management side. So from the finance side, you have your accounts payable, your accounts receivable, budgeting, cash and bank management, cost accounting, and so on and so forth, right? From the supply chain management side, you have your asset management, inventory management, IoT connectors, master planning so that you can understand different forecasts of your different inventory items, procurement and sourcing, etc. Right? So the way that we configured the Microsoft Dynamics 365 extension, it plugs in directly into the out-of-the-box Dynamics 365 tenant, so that you would have your Radish 34 module and all the back-end services, right? The users never actually have to see anything blockchain. But what's really happening here behind the scenes? What's happening is that we have our Radish 34 module that you see here in the middle. And this is where we're going to get where our decentralized operations really meets decentralized applications. Because on the left-hand side, you see our buyer modules. This is standard, out of the box, not configured by Envision. This is like if you pay the license from Dynamics 365, you get this out of your box. You get the procurement and sourcing module that includes the request for quotations, the purchase orders, opportunity to put in your vendors, and then you also have this product information management module where you can input all your products. And on the far right-hand side, you have your supplier modules where you have your request for quotations, sales orders, customers, and the same thing for the product information management. But here's what's new, is you have this Radish 34 module, if you will. So when a buyer is sending a request for proposal, it goes through this module. So let's extrapolate on what that module is. So if we take a look at what's happening, we have all of our other, existing technologies, except for one. We have our Microsoft Dynamics 365, we have our Radish services, we have our proxy, we have our Bull.js. We can even say that Socrates, even though that it might be new technology, let's just say that this is not, shared by anybody. There's something different between on-chain and off-chain, which we can discuss in another presentation. But the key here is like, what's the actual decentralized part? Why are we calling this a decentralized application? Well, it's because of the blockchain client specifically, which for that demo, it was using the Ethereum client called Nethermind. And there's many different options as well. So this is what makes this particular Radish 34 application a decentralized application. Because there's something, I'm going to just assume that everyone in the audience here is familiar with blockchain technology, and you have your blockchain network, and the programs, for example, that run on a blockchain network are something called smart contracts. And smart contracts, they have these microservices architecture, if you will. So the way that these smart contracts were deployed in this Radish 34 demo, and the way that we're putting this into our Dynamic 365 stack, it really looks like this. There's something called an ERC 1820 smart contract. If you're using the Ethereum mainnet, there's no need to deploy that contract. It's already out there for you to grip onto. But if, let's just say, if you're running this on a test net, that still needs to be deployed. That provides an interface for the rest of the smart contracts to actually work, right? For the folks that are not technical on this call, just think about it like this. The following smart contracts that I'm going to talk about address these three sections. You have smart contracts that address organization management. You have smart contracts that address process and privacy management. And then you have smart contracts that address token management. So let's take a look into them. We have the organization management, which is controlled by the org registry contract. Consider that your identity module, if you will. This is where you get the which organizations are allowed to do certain roles. For example, in this Radish 34 use case, which organizations are buyers, which organizations are suppliers, what's the identity of them. Then you have your process and privacy management smart contracts, your verifier contract and your shield contract. The verifier and shield contract, what that allows is atomic compartmentalization. And what that basically means is that if you have multiple suppliers that are bidding for one specific bid, no supplier should ever be able to see what the other supplier is doing, period. And by leveraging this pair of a verifier and shield contract, it allows just that. We can get deeper, but I'm afraid that we're going to run out of time. We only have 4 minutes here until the end of the webinar. But just know, and we can definitely address this in side conversations, that the verifier and shield contract is what's keeping these transactions private, but it's still part of this decentralized network called a mainnet. And then you have token management, where you have ERC20 contracts that are deployed. You can have ERC 721 contracts, which the difference is one's fungible, one's non-fungible. And then we have an ERC 1155 contract, which is a multi-token contract. So you can have fungible, non-fungible with the ERC 1155. But taking a look into it from really the high level view, this part is your decentralized application, where everything else, it can be centralized, but you're only sharing specific information for those organizations that need to see it, right? So let's go ahead and flash this view for just 1 second. Here we have our decentralized operations meets decentralized applications. And then I'm going to just flip to the next screen, which basically shows all these different components that we just spoke about. So for example, at the level 1, you have Microsoft Azure, you have MongoDB, you have your zero knowledge proof containers, you have all these other containers, etc. And then at the level 2, you have your blockchain, you have your mainnet. And then at level 3, you have your smart contracts, which is your ERC 1820, the org registry, the verifier, the shield, etc. And then at the 4th level, again, now we're back, we're like at that sandwich, right? These are like the 2 buns that are going on top. Then you have your existing technology, which is really your user interface. And our user interface for this for this particular presentation is Dynamics 365, along with the Envision Blockchain Radish 34 extension that we just spoke about. So, like, where does immutability really help? So when we think about immutability, we're thinking about decentralized operations, and we're also thinking about decentralized applications. So you can find all this information over here in the link that's on the lower left, but just to speak to it, the first one is the volume discount problem. The Radish 34 POC, it demonstrates how to ensure that every PO that gets sent out executes faithfully and in the correct order. It also addresses the multilateral to bilateral compartmentalization problem, so that no party in an RFP process should ever have access to other parties' bids using encryption techniques that we were just discussing. Just keep in mind the case study number 1, where all the sensitive information got leaked because it was a centralized aggregation log system that, I mean, like, look, it had a password that was missing, which is really the root cause of it all, but maybe someone would able to be hacked the password, right? That's just something to keep in mind. It also addresses the blind coordination problem, so that you can ensure the overall integrity of the workflow and run complex business rules that can connect all the counterparties when it's appropriate. And that's the most important thing, that the workflow step should only be notified to the organization that needs to get notified. Not everyone in the entire supply chain should know the status update unless it's necessary. You also have the co-opetition problem, which is being addressed. Again, having sensitive information is very sensitive and very private. And we should never be writing this particular information on chain. So not ever should be writing this information to the blockchain. That's why all of this information stays in your system of record, which is why we brought up case study number 2 with Revlon and Elizabeth Arden, because realistically, if this was a couple years, either ahead or behind, depending on which way you look at it, they would have not needed to implement a new ERP system. You could have kept the same systems that you have, but then just, integrated this baseline stack and then have this mainnet running on the background. Therefore, all these RFPs that they missed out on, it would have been addressed one way or another because of the immutability factor. And then, of course, just to let everyone know that this extension is available in the Dynamics 365 store. That's in the Microsoft App Store, the App Source. So it's bit.ly/baseline-D365 is where to find that. We wanted to save this here at the end for those that didn't know who Envision Blockchain is, but again, we had so much content that we just wanted to cover. So we are a consulting and custom application development firm to help out with any of these implementation or early phase approaches and discussions. So as you can see here, reading from left to right, we help out with consulting and custom development services, helping develop out proof of concepts all the way through different MVP development rollouts, helping out with gathering functional and technical requirements, all the way through, supporting, go live and helping out with different migration services. We leverage, as you could saw, many cloud different technologies. And of course, we start out with our consultative approach with different types of workshops, where the baseline protocol is one that is kind of the shiny object, is what everyone wants to know, what the baseline protocol is and what needs to be done to implement that into their specific ERP solution. So again, thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us either on our website, www.envisionblockchain.com, or send us an email at info@envisionblockchain.com. And I'll take a second over here just to see if we had any questions.